Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. I'm super excited to talk with Rishabh and discuss about telesales, talk about how you guys can get better at being better salespeople, being better sales managers, sales operations. We have a lot of good stuff to talk about. We'll quickly start off with just some introductions. My name is Nikhil Parwal. You people also know me, and my customers know me as Nick because that's just the easier way of pronouncing my name in US. So I've been with LeadSquared for a little over a year and a half. I currently help in growing our business in the healthcare division for US market. I have been in sales for almost over a decade now. I don't look that old, which is a good thing. And I've learned a lot about inside sales, telesales in my journey so far. And I'm super excited to have with me Rishabh Ladha, who's our co-founder of ScottStack and has been leading the business team there. He comes with more than 12 years of experience across sales, customer success, product management, venture capital. He's also has been recognized by Forbes 30 under 30 and Asia and British Council Global Changemakers. I know there's so many of these accolades, Rishabh, that you've collected. It's motivating enough.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Nikhil. I appreciate it. I don't think sales has left me that young anymore, looking at least, even though age-wise I am. I think the grays don't really show it. But very, very excited to be here. For everyone attending from the US side, you can call me Rish. That was my US name because it's easier for people to remember. But super excited to be here and talk about telesales and how and talk about the broad industry trends that at least we at ScottStack are seeing and how the future looks possibly. And very, very excited to jump right in.
Absolutely. And before I hand over the presentation and the discussion over to you, Rishabh, just a quick introduction to everybody. I know people are still joining in, and we'd love to know you, which company you're from, what your role is, what you guys do. So feel free to talk about yourself in the chat. Let us know what you guys do. We'll try to keep this as interactive as possible. Use the chat option to ask us questions. We'll try to take as many as we can towards the end of the session as well. And we'll have polls to try and know a little bit more about your journey in sales, what you guys are doing, what your focus is, what your company is doing. So feel free to participate. I will urge everybody to participate in those polls. And finally, we'll just housekeeping rules. We'll keep everybody on mute. So don't worry if you have pets, kids yelling in the background. Don't worry about it. We're all working from home. I have thunderstorms in Pune, where I am joining in from. So everybody has crazy dynamic environments right now that we're dealing with. And with that being said, over to you, Rishabh, and then we'd love to learn a little bit more about ScottStack and more about telesales.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. So thanks, LeadSquared, for this opportunity. I think very, very excited to be here. I'll just tell you a little bit about ScottStack. I'll take a minute to talk about what we do and why we're talking about this. So ScottStack is essentially a telesales, a telecalling platform, but we run an aggregator model, like a flexible workforce, where you can set up an on-demand sales team or a calling team of qualified telecallers, and we give you a robust tech stack, and there's a bunch of AI for quality control and script improvement. So it basically just helps you set up a secure, effective, and ROI variable cost telesales team. And we work largely within the India BFSI EdTech e-commerce market. We just recently raised a large funding round to just build the future of the telesales business. So we're very, very excited to be here and talk about what we see as key future trends in this space. I think largely, and this is not rocket science, every team leader, every manager, every individual who's ever built a sales team it's a difficult process, right? And within telesales, you have these three broad areas which are largely problematic, which are hiring, training, and management. I think every issue you face as a sales manager, leader, CEO can come down and boil down to one of these three things. If I talk about hiring, a lot of us, especially in telesales, we may end up looking for the wrong things. When you do B2B sales hiring, it's still, you have an interview process. There's a whole bunch of other things that go in there. But when you're hiring for telesales, it's there's not much you can do by just looking at a CV. You need a lot more. You need voice samples. You need better sense of people's aptitudes, because you're hiring in mass as well, right? So hiring is not structured, and it causes a bunch of problems, and it's very difficult for people to scale. We've also had several situations of overhiring, burnout, culture, etc. Then it comes to training. Training is uh, again a massive area where it's a huge challenge for a lot of businesses. You and then, classroom training doesn't really scale. I don't know if or shadow along training doesn't really scale, and it's not something that's scaled for a really long time, yet we continue to do it, and massively problematic, very, very difficult. And the last thing is management. Salespeople management is always a big challenge. You give them a CRM, you give them a dialer, you have a bunch of tech alongside it, but yet it's very difficult for you to manage and get productivity out of it, right? So campaign management and agent management are two very, very distinct things and should be viewed separately. They're both equally important. It's not just about hiring a bunch of people. You need a good system to run an effective telesales team. And that investment is equally, if not more important than just hiring people, right? So all of those things are quite important. And if I have to take a step back, what's 2023 going to be for us, right? It's going to be better quality, better managers, better flexible work environments, very, very important, better data security. The number of times as a business, as a consumer, we've heard stories about data breaches, or or you getting spammed. Like it's I feel very uncomfortable giving my number out anywhere, right? So data security is extremely important, both for internal and external teams. Just because your data is visible to someone who's an internal stakeholder doesn't mean it's secure. And having a much better handle on productivity and cost modeling, because we're entering an environment which is recessionary. Every country across the world is facing some slowdown, and sales is an expensive function. Ultimately, it's a metric driven function, so it's easier to measure ROI. And when something's easier to measure on ROI, everyone's looking at it and saying, this is too expensive, or how can we make this better? So there's going to be a lot more focus on better cost and productivity modeling for any type of sales, especially telesales. So I think that's the broad outlook. If I have to, and again, if I have to take a step within this, and maybe just one quick question, Nikhil, do you think we're missing anything here? Do you think you want to add to this at all in terms of what you're seeing?
No, I think all of these points are absolutely, essential when it comes to thinking about telesales and just sales as a function.
Right.
I think you've touched on some of the most key areas that either we end up not focusing on or not giving enough weightage, because sales as a function is a lot revenue driven. It's high pressure, so you're focused on closing deals, but you essentially forget what's the base that can help you get there. So I think these are great points that you're covering, Rishabh, for sure.
Thank you. All right, so let's jump right in. Let's get into what we believe is our list of 6 key things that will just only increase in scale or problems or challenges in 2023. First one is remote's here to stay. I think we've all gotten used to this hybrid mode of figuring things out, and you're in Pune, I'm in Gurgaon. I was in 3 cities in the last 1 week. I think we're all getting very used to this idea of working remotely. Now, specifically when it comes to telesales in the context of most places in the world, it's not the highest paying sales job. It's usually an entry level job. It's usually someone who's maybe fresh out of college, sometimes fresh out of grad school, or like, a 10 plus 2, like a higher, high school. And for someone to make that salary and live in a large city, it's not the easiest life, especially in the context of a country like India, for example. And I'm sure this is common across the states and other parts of the world as well. And post pandemic, one of the things that we saw with a lot of businesses was everyone was very, very comfortable with the idea of hiring people remotely. But it had one catch: culture, accountability. Because everyone was like, well, look, I'm very happy to get a remote sales team, but I'm not able to get them to be productive. And that's where it all broke down. So a lot of businesses were like, you know what, this is not working. Let's get everyone back in office and let's go back to business as usual, which works. But you're also losing out on a lot of great people who may want to work remotely or may want flexible terms, or any of those things, right? So I think ultimately, how do we solve for this? And I've seen about 1 in 20 teams solve for this, who were traditionally very, in office telesales setup, but are now very, very comfortable with the flexible setup and are able to make it work, right? So the first most important thing is tech, right? Like, you've got to have a good CRM, you've got to use it, you've got to use your dialers, you've got to be able to understand what people are doing, right? Now, a lot of times it all exists, just people don't use it, which means the culture of accountability, which is our second point right here, is extremely critical. Previously, and we'll talk more about this, your sales manager is someone, especially in telesales, I'm on the dialer the whole day, someone's looking over my shoulder, I know I can crank out a few extra hours and extra calls and I'll be okay. But when you're remote, all of that goes away, right? During the pandemic, a lot of people's productivity broke down and a lot of people were not able to manage that very efficiently. So now that you have the ability to choose and say that, look, this is something that we can, potentially run in-house, but also have a remote team. A lot of people are like, you know what, remote doesn't work for us because we don't have that culture anymore. But I think, how do you create that culture in your team of accountability without having someone look over your shoulder? Because it can drive wonders for your business, because it then allows you to access talent pool in places that are less expensive, because costs are a big problem. And you can actually get really, really good talent from different places. And you can also build flexible teams. You can build teams that are not, fixed cost, or you can get part-timers. You can really hone in on that. So remote's here to stay, and everyone is embracing this in their own way. So this is one big key trend that we've seen. That's something that, is not going away, no matter how much you move against that.
No, and just to add to that, right, Rishabh, I think having tried to, and right now having a split team between US and India, and everybody being remote, right? That's one of the things that I have seen in my experience in the last 8 odd months, is that it does get difficult. How do you help? And you touched on that point, is being able to utilize technology to bring and drive some of that accountability, to make sure that you are not coming across as a micromanager, while telling somebody, hey, you're not making your 40 calls a day. But at the end of the day, I'm making sure that, can I have my CRM just remind me to complete my tasks, build that cadence for me, that I can just complete that and let my manager know that I'm doing my job and this is my outcome of the hard work I've done for the day. Right. So having the technology built that works exactly for your process is very, very important. While it also gives, for me as a manager, the ability to see the accountability, it doesn't let my team feel micromanaged in any way, right? And I don't want to come across as a manager like that as well.
Yeah, that doesn't scale. Yeah, so I think that's where adoption of good tech, along with, like, the tech's existed, is just getting people to use it in a remote setting and driving. I think completely agreed with it with you, Nick. I think the next one is a little too close to my heart and maybe worthy of another webinar in itself, but this is one of my biggest pet peeves, is that sales ops just, it's terrible. It is. And then let me actually break down what sales ops is for you. So, like, the technical definition, and I'm going to read this out, is sales ops brings a system of selling, or brings systems to selling, right? So it refers to the unit, role, or activity and process within a sales org that supports, enables, and drives frontline sales teams to sell better, faster, and more efficiently. Now, let's break that down. It's what drives productivity in your sales team, period, right? And sales ops is such a broken function right now. In so many teams, it doesn't even exist at all. Your sales ops person is supposed to be someone who can, integrate stuff, look at data, be creative, come up with different views on things, right? And I don't believe this is a tech issue at all. I think the technology and the systems and CRMs like LeadSquared or anything else that integrates into everything already exist. You just need to have individuals, and I'm saying individuals because I think the tech is there. You need individuals who can help you really understand what's going on and help you figure out a way to improve it, right? So if I think about, what are those pieces, right? One is integration, like the number of times your dialer is not integrated with your CRM, your data is not entered, I have no idea what's going on. Standard issue happens everywhere. It's BS. Anyone who says I don't record calls, I'm sorry, you have no way of knowing what's really going on. Everything has to be integrated into your CRM, right? You need to be able to track what's going on, which comes to the second piece, which is how do you measure your sales team productivity, right? You've got to measure the activities, the dials, the connects, the conversations, the call recording analysis, the pipeline. It's all there. Yet the consistency of measuring that data doesn't exist. In so many teams, I've seen salespeople hate sales ops. And I'm like, if that happens, you're doing your job well, because you have to be able to put in the data. Otherwise, it doesn't exist, right? If it's not in the CRM, it doesn't exist. It's not real. And then using that to actually make better decisions, right? Hey, this deal's been sitting in, I don't know, SAL for the last 3 weeks. That's not okay. It typically takes 2 weeks. So there's something wrong here. Raise a red flag. There is no next task. There is no activity logged. You've not logged 2 meetings here. The notes are in, like, all of that is processed, because that's really what you can do as a manager. You can just look at inputs. The results can vary for a number of reasons. So having a good sales ops function, and maybe the ratio is about, like, depending on the type of product you're selling, you can have one person for every 20 AEs or 10 AEs maybe. And in the case of, like, let's say telesales, you can have about 1 in 50, you can live with that. But not having this is criminal almost, because you're leaving so much productivity and money behind on the table by not utilizing the data you already have the ability to measure, already sit on and use. So I feel very strongly about this. I'm totally down to doing another webinar if the LeadSquared team lets me, on sales ops particularly, because it's so important in today's world. Again, Nikhil, I mean, if you want to add anything to it, if you're like me as a sales leader, I'm very data driven. I like seeing that data. So
no, I absolutely agree, and I think I resonate with you when you said that if you don't like sales ops, you're doing a job, right? That was the case when, back in the days when sales ops would come back and tell us that, hey, I did an analysis of the last week's productivity and you barely made any phone calls, right? And you're not seeing conversion. The conversion is going down because you're not doing your job right. And you never liked that answer. You never wanted to hear it. But that was the truth. It gave you the realistic picture that this is where you're going wrong. This is where you need to make that change. So I truly agree and believe that you need a sales ops function, however small it may be. It brings about some standardization to your approach towards sales, and how you need to go about it. And I think the recent poll that we just that we did, and I see 46 people voted for it. We're seeing a very close call, even in how managers what can they do to boost telesales efficiency, right? And I think we're seeing a very close in percentage between 29% saying mapping the right leads to the right team members who have the right knowledge based on to cater to those leads. Coming in very close is coaching the teams to handle objections, right? And then we have the third, which is introducing better incentive programs. I mean, who doesn't like better incentives and bonuses to push them to sell more?
Yeah. I think 2 of these responses are sales ops, like mapping the right leads, and incentive programs are part sales ops. Objections and analyzing recordings, etc., is more QA, which we're going to come on, I think, next or maybe the one after that. So
Right.
completely agree with the team there. Let's talk about this. This is a super touchy topic for everyone. Every sales leader, you just pick them and you're like, what's your biggest problem? My team's not productive or not productive enough, right? And this is now more important than ever because we're entering a phase of contraction or at least some slowdown. Everyone's facing it. Every business out there is facing some pressure in some way, shape, or form, right? And I think what's really critical is that I think we talked about this, right? Sales is a very, very metric-driven function. It's easy to measure. But what's problematic is how many times as a business I don't really have a very good handle on what's my cost of acquisition broken down by marketing and sales. A lot of people track blended cost of acquisition, which is fine, but you need to be able to break down marketing cost, sales cost, and every other thing that goes into acquiring a customer and what your lifetime value then looks like. Because a majority of the cost, especially if you're doing telesales and you're, let's say, a B2C business or someone who does B2 SME, let's say, for instance, your marketing is much more expensive than your sales team cost. And by not breaking that down, you may be looking at data the wrong way, or and you'd be surprised the number of large companies that don't do this properly, right? And you can keep saying my team's not very productive or my cost of acquisition is too high, but you can really do and it's not rocket science, it's very simple math, but most teams don't do a really good job of getting to actual cost of acquisition or deals or revenue per agent, having a clear benchmark of what return on ad spend or ROI looks like. And I think you have to really start with a yardstick. There'll always be agents that are not very productive or below team averages, but having a good sense of this number is very, very important. Now, what you do with it is obviously you got to improve it, right? But you start with first understanding what that ROI is and how big the gap is. And ultimately, going back to the sales ops point and the first point on using your CRM, you can only improve what you measure. And I think as a sales leader, once you have a sense of, okay, this is my ROI, you can then start to break down your team into maybe 3 or 4 metrics, which is activities, objectives, and outcomes, right? So the 2-3 metrics that I'm talking about here are like, one is activities, which is very simply plain vanilla input, right? As an agent, if I'm in telesales, the simplest example is the number of dials you make, right? Plain, very, very simple. It's completely in control of your agent, of your telesales agent. And that's something that you can very, very easily measure through a dialer, through a CRM. Super important, having clear goals, targets, etc. on that. Next thing is objectives, which is the quality of the input. It's influenceable. It's not 100% in your control. For example, dials to conversations or connects to conversations. I can't really always ensure that I will have a conversation with a lead, but I can coach someone to have longer conversations once you actually get someone on the phone. That's influenceable. So if you are to break down your agents and say, okay, you got to do 100 dials and you'll connect with 80 people. And when you talk to 80 people, how many are you actually having a conversation with that's, let's say, greater than 2 minutes? You've been able to keep someone on the phone for 2 minutes, maybe it's 1 minute. That's a great sign that this person can at least get someone and hold them on the phone and keep their interest and get them to the next phase. Those are completely still in your control or are influenceable through coaching, because there is no way by like standing behind the screen and saying, okay, I'm going to get better ROI out of this, right? But how? You have to break the metrics down. And then comes the outcomes or the outputs, right? Like, or even with objectives, like the second segment, you can have things like the number of leads you've qualified or the number of leads you moved into a hot pipeline or a call quality score, right? Like a lot of people don't properly measure that. And then finally, you've got outcomes and outputs, which is revenue or deals or, and that's what gets you to your ROI. So first, very important, you have to start with the results. But the only way to influence those results is by breaking down your metrics in terms of work rate, quality of work, and then your results. And that's the only way to now see how do we improve our team's productivity and work backwards. The only way to do that is by focusing on inputs and quality of inputs. You cannot control, or you can only influence outcomes, you can't control them. It's very, very easy to always say, hey, what number did you hit? What revenue did you hit? There's not much you can do about it. You can't really do anything to change it. So stressing again, use your CRM, track your activities, and because that's all you can actually control and influence in your team, the results will come, right? So again, linked to using the CRM and sales ops, productivity, this is probably the only way to drive it. I don't know, Nikhil, if you have any other view on this, but this is something that I've seen a lot of sales teams miss out on because it's so easy to measure results. But it's the analogy I give is it's very easy to step on a weighing machine and check your weight every day. It's very hard to track your steps and count your calories or how many you burnt or how many you ate every day. Those are the activities. Activities are implicitly harder to measure, but that's the only thing you can actually control.
No, I absolutely agree. I think one of the key ways to identify somebody's productivity is seeing, I mean, there are KRAs that you expect everybody to come in and complete and do, and you can teach them and you can tell them. One of the other aspects that I keep telling myself on a daily basis, even today, is if I want to be better in my job, I need to make sure that I am mentally telling myself what can make me successful in that role. How do I make sure that my 8 hours of work time, whether I'm doing that in office or whether I'm doing that at home, how can I make myself more productive? And that starts with something very basic, is being sincere at your job, right? Being sincere about completing those activities, completing those tasks, making sure that you're doing those dials. You're trying to be better and you're learning from what you did wrong yesterday and trying to work on improving that. Obviously, you have your managers and you have your QAs and you have your sales ops to tell you that based on data. What is it that you can do on your own to increase your productivity, right? And on the business side of things, like everything that you mentioned hits directly on point. It ties back to being able to look at data, being able to look at loss analysis and seeing, are we losing out on something because we're not doing enough number of phone calls? And if that is the thing, how do we improve that? Going back to the CRM and saying, are we not involving enough number of tasks or follow-ups via email, via text messages, via WhatsApp, via phone calls? How do I touch my customer different ways? And am I losing my customer because I'm not reaching out to them enough? So how do I do that in my cadence from a CRM perspective? And I think even the poll that's running right now, and which is what is the biggest challenge that is slowing down telesales, right? We're seeing one of the 37% of people voting for not knowing which leads to contact first. Right. And then that ties back to the previous poll saying 30% saying, I don't know what to map to my telesales team. Right. So if the mapping is wrong, because you don't know which one to touch on first, so it all ties back together to everything you're saying. So
absolutely. Nope, I think spot on. Cool. I think the next one is a tricky area because it's one of the most it's the most important activity when you're doing telesales, because all you really have is you got some activities, but this is really the meat of the problem, right? Like this is a very abstract thing that calls. Most people, you pick them up and you ask them, did you listen to calls? And no one enjoys listening to calls. I don't know if anyone who's told me, hey, I love listening to calls. It's an activity that you do. It's a coaching activity. It's difficult. It's not easy, but it is so important that people do it. Now, this is really where we've seen a lot of investment in the B2B space. You got companies like Gong, etc., that have built tech for helping you analyze conversations. But on the B2C side, where typically a telesales team sits, this is not as the investment in technology there is not as massive. A lot of teams take a very, very cookie cutter, cost-focused approach to this. Hey, I have to sample 1 call per agent per day because that is something that I'm supposed to do. But we're missing out on a massive gap here, which is we're not really thinking about customer experience in a big way. I just sat with an e-commerce business recently, and they said, look, I don't care if it costs more. My callers have to, work at a certain rate and sound like a certain way because it is important for the brand experience that I deliver and I stand for. And very, very few QA agents can even get to that point in the way, because it's treated like a cost problem, right? It's not treated like a revenue problem. This has got potential to increase the quality of outcomes across the board. The other is sales compliance, right? Like, mis-selling is a problem. It's a huge problem in the education industry. It's a problem in the insurance space, lending, you name it, right? Any B2C business has these problems, and it could happen for a number of reasons, including lack of proper training and so on. But it's much more regulated in industries like insurance, but maybe it's possibly important for everyone, right? And so first and foremost, having a dialer or a system which can capture call recording so you can do this in the first place is very important. Second is that you got to invest in better call QA. Now, there's technology to do it, or you can even look at frameworks and have certain people come in to help. So that's one very, very big area of investment that we believe we're going to see in 2023, because there's going to be a lot of focus on compliance, and regulators are clamping down here. Like, I mean, with at least in the Indian context, you got SEBI, RBI, etc. We're already talking a lot about consumer protection and several things that you need to do. And so this is an area where, as a brand, it's very easy to, lose sight of customer experience, especially as you scale a team. How do you get that to a consistent quality level? So that's very, very critical. The other is knowledge management. I'll give you an example. Let's say if you're running a telesales team and you have, let's say, 40 people, 4 team leaders, give or take, right? Because churn is high, and if your team leader leaves, a lot of the context and expertise that they've built leaves with them. Your system is not storing any insight about what's working and what's not working. What are the new objections that are coming up? What are the new challenges that are coming up? What are the different types of scripts that are working well? Which objection has, what type of response that leads to better outcomes? A lot of that is tacit knowledge that sits with your team leader or a good sales agent that usually gets lost. And unless you have a good call quality coaching framework in place, a lot of that tacit knowledge gets, is going away. And you talk to any sales leader and they'll tell you, as I increase the size of my team, my productivity of my agents goes down because my coaching program, my training program, my inherent knowledge sort of breaks away. And so we believe that this is an area where quality increase is, increasing call quality and coaching and using analytics is going to be a very, very big place.
No, I truly agree. And I think, it's funny that we're talking about QA and somebody listening to calls and that's sounding like a very boring job. I came across an Instagram reel yesterday where there are these content creators who are talking about listening being an actual job that people do, right? Where they're literally just getting hired to listen to calls and transcript the outcome of those. But it's very, very essential, because I remember from my first job as a demand generation executive, where we were incentivized and our efforts were taken into consideration when the QA would listen to the call and say, yes, this was a valid call. It was a good quality conversation and is going to get approved. So that also pushes you as a sales rep to perform better, right? To make sure that you can listen to your own conversation and say, this is where you went wrong. This is why this lead did not convert to the next step. So the QA function definitely is very, very important and should be taken into consideration, like you said, as an investment more than a cost. Right? It's an investment in your sales process to identify where your sales teams are going wrong, and you can reverse engineer the gaps in the sales process for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's an audit the auditor problem as well. I'll just give you a simple example, right? I've seen these cases play out. As an auditor, I know, hey, Nick's a great sales rep. I'm just gonna, give him 80 on 100 on most of his calls, and because I'm trying to skate, right? So it's also a problem, right? Because you treat it as a cost problem. You're not treating it as a revenue generating unit with having KPIs around, figuring out ways to improve the script, improve the pitch, strategically think about how we're selling. And so I think there's a shift required, like you said, to take it from a cost unit to an investment unit. Right. I think we have two more. This again is a massive area of underinvestment. So I call this Sales Manager 3.0 because, again, I could be biased, but at least in telesales, I don't believe as an industry or a lot of companies I've spoken with have done enough to make their sales managers really cutting edge. And so I call it 3.0 because that's the kind of jump that I believe the industry needs to take. And the reason why that is, it's very simple. We spend disproportionately way more money on salespeople training than we do on manager training. Like, just ask anyone. Like, most sales teams do not have a manager training program. Like, it's just, hey, you're a good rep. What's next? You become a manager. But just because you were a great player doesn't make you a great coach, right? So salespeople can be artists, and this is Mark Roberg, the CRO of HubSpot. I'm just quoting him. He said, "Look, salespeople can be artists. You can be creative, but as a sales manager, you're a scientist. There's no room for art. It's an extremely measurable, quantitative job, and unless you're trained on how to do it well, you will fail as a sales manager, or you'll be mediocre at best, right? And great managers deliver disproportionate outcomes. That much is certain, right? And especially, and a good salesperson will quit a bad manager any given day. So this is a massive area of improvement in at least in my belief. And let's talk about the areas where it can truly be improved, right? So one's remote. We talked about it as the first point. Most sales managers are used to inherently to the pre-COVID working model. At least in telesales, what that looks like is you've got a floor, you're walking around, you're listening to calls, you're barging in. If someone has a question, they raise their hand, you jump in, you're there, right? That model works. It's not a bad model, but that we're not ready. A lot of people, at least, are not ready for remote management, right? So that in itself, where if you have to look over someone's shoulder in order to drive productivity, that is a function of the culture of accountability that you built, and that goes very well hand in hand with remote management. The other big piece is having a data-driven approach. As a sales manager, do I know how to review dashboards? Do I know what metrics I need to look for? Do I know exactly, by looking at the data, what to coach for? Do I know exactly what I need to first coach for and then coach the next? Most of us, we're like, hey, you have these 4 problems, now go figure. That's a big mistake. As a sales manager, you need to identify the one thing that this person will work on, and then create a plan for them to improve it, track it over several weeks, and then go to the next thing and the next thing, because salespeople we're simple people, right? You tell us too many things, we'll get confused. And so as a manager, do you know how to read the data, understand what the problem is, diagnose that, create a coaching plan, measure the impact of that coaching plan? Most people will tell you, hey, you have to do these 3 things, and you don't go back and look at it, right? So again, this is where a CRM can help, assuming you have the ability to, you're entering all of the data points, etc., in the first place. The next one is a little tricky, but I've seen some companies do it. The example is, let's say you got a 20-person telesales team, right? And everyone's got a goal. More often than not, the Pareto principle in a sales team will follow. You will have some people crushing their quota. You'll have a middle agent group, which will be broadly getting you some averages. And then you'll have like your bottom tier agents who will most likely churn out. Now, as a sales manager, in a lot of places, one thing I've noticed is that there's a culture of, okay, let's remove everyone who's not performing and let's get them out of the system, right? And sometimes that may be true because overall as a unit, you're able to get your quota for the 20 people you have. But individually, are your agents improving? So one of the things that I've seen some teams do very, very rarely now, but it's coming up, is that you have, as a sales manager, you got your team quota, and then you also are incentivized on your individual agents meeting their respective quota, which means as a sales manager, you are now much more incentivized to take the time to coach your team, because as a manager, that's the most important job that you need to do. So that's something that we're seeing very, very early days. I've seen maybe, again, 1 out of 20 teams do it properly, but that's an area where teams are spending much more time on, along with creating better training programs for their managers, because that's truly what will drive productivity out of your team.
So Rishabh, I actually have a question for you. So you
Please.
already told us that, what would go into making a great sales manager. I want to know from your journey and your experience in 12 years, what were some of the failures that you came across as a leader, as a manager, that you identified in your journey?
I think,
or rather than failures, let me say, what were some of the mistakes that you made as a sales leader that somebody shouldn't do?
I've made every mistake in the book. Waste time on an unqualified opportunity, assuming what my prospect said was true, not prioritizing my leads, not having my to-do set up, not time blocking for prospecting, not listening to calls, not looking at like my talk to listen ratio. I'm terrible at that, by the way. I end up talking a lot on sales calls, more than I should. So I've made every mistake in the book as a salesperson. As a manager, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was not realizing that even though there are like 3-4 things that a salesperson should be doing, but it's very similar to product management. Product management talks about T-shaped skills, right? So you got like a set of base skills and you got like expertise in a certain area. And it's very critical to identify, no matter what kind of sales role you could be a telesales guy or an AE, it doesn't matter. Every salesperson has a unique superpower. And I've started asking this question in all my new interviews to salespeople. I was like, what's your superpower? Some people's superpower is relationships. Like, I'm on the phone with you and I'll be like, okay, you're my best friend now. And we're talking like about our hobbies and football and what have you. Then there are some people who are like really good at like hitting the phones. Like they will prospect the shit out of, they'll be like twice, like they'll work harder than anyone you've ever met. They may be not as charismatic, or they may not really do the conversations like someone else would, right? But they will hit the numbers because it's a numbers game, right? And so the person who you can charm their way out of things sometimes may not be the most suited salesperson for that role, right? Because someone has to hit the numbers. So I think that was the other big mistake, or the assumption that I worked with, that, hey, look, these are the 3 things you need to do, and like just start doing it without realizing, hey, what's your actual superpower? And let's double down on that superpower before I tell you, these are my base skills, but what can you truly double down on as a T? I think those are the 2 that I can really think off the top of my head right now. Would ask the same question from you as well, Nick.
So one of the key mistakes that I think I made in my journey as a sales manager was trying to cushion my team a lot, right? To a point that I was literally doing their job for them. And I didn't give them a chance to truly excel in what they could do themselves. Maybe it was, and this was one of the mistakes I made becoming a manager the first time, where I felt that I wanted my team to excel so much and so badly that I was pretty much doing everything that they were going to do. Like I wouldn't give them the opportunity for them to do it themselves.
Yeah.
And I realized that this is a mistake because I'm not letting them grow in their own capacity.
Yeah.
And I was burning myself out to a point that
Yeah.
I was not going to be able to do a good job as a manager. So that was one of the initial mistakes I made. And I think another one was you sometimes get so bogged down towards the end of the quarter, towards the end of the year, with numbers not being achieved, that you end up letting that frustration onto things that may not really be something that you need to be, mad at.
Yeah.
When it comes to your team. So finding that balance, as to understanding that this is not something is their fault and not something that I should be laying out on them, and it's more a reflection on myself. So being able to find that balance initially was something which I was lacking. I'm working on every single day as a manager myself.
Very
so I think those are the
interesting.
two things that come to my mind. Yeah.
The first one, I actually now, as you said it, I'm like, I've actually done that as well. And sometimes I continue to do that, and that's not a good thing. So I completely hear you. Yeah, and I agree. Cool. I think we have the last and one of the biggest areas where you can create delta. Because this is typically a fairly underutilized, underinvested function right now, at least in telesales, or most sales in general. And I'll start that with this flywheel right here, right? So as a business, what are the three most important things? Got sales, marketing, product. Everything can just be turned into those three key areas, right? And as a business, we typically, at least in B2C sales where telesales is prevalent, your product and your marketing teams are typically much more expensive and larger cost centers than your sales team. But your sales team is the one that is actually talking to all your customers. And we all know the old adage of like sales and marketing not getting along. And that's true in several respects, because as sales, you miss out on so many rich analytics and insights about the end customer because you're just too busy getting to your quota and getting to your number. And it's not also something that you can expect out of every salesperson, right? Like I was reading this somewhere, like someone said, look, screw all the product management prioritization frameworks, just sit with your customer success and sales team and ask them what the problem is, and then just prioritize that, right? Because that's possibly one of the best ways. And I don't know, Nick, if I touched a nerve there, because I know this is a huge problem in the B2B world as well. But I think it's very critical that you look at your sales team as an insight generation machine. Specifically in telesales, right? More often than not, we're not spending enough on meaningfully capturing analytics. And what I mean by that is not just like your basic productivity, dialer metrics, etc., right? But really deeply understanding the funnel, deeply understanding by different lead sources, understanding what your positive funnel looks like, what your negative funnel looks like. If people are buying, why are they buying? If people are not buying, why are they not buying? Taking the time to really invest in lead quality analysis, right? So because marketing is a much bigger spend. And as a sales team, I'm sure everyone's sort of gone back to marketing and said, hey, this lead was bad. But instead of that, imagine how much more powerful is it to say, hey, last month we got 500 leads. Of these, 300 said they had absolutely no idea why they wanted the product. 200 said this, and then so on and so forth. Like, and by the way, here are the recordings, and here's the insights, and here's the data. Suddenly you flip the narrative and build so much more leverage on the sales team side that's never happened before. And the data is all there. It's in your CRM, right? So all you need to do is use it to build that leverage. Or same example, take it to the product team. Hey, these are the competitors that were mentioned. These are the product feedback points that came up. And do something about it. And by the way, I'm not just making this up. Here's the data, right? And it's all there. So that in itself has the ability implicitly to increase the ROI of your sales team many-fold, because that is a beautiful flywheel that most teams do not have a way of executing on. Most teams probably don't have a very good sales marketing product sync happening. Everything's in several cases happening in isolation. If you do a good job of it, congratulations. Most teams do not. And this is a massively underinvested, underutilized area today, and can give you the ability to truly double down and increase the productivity of your entire business. Not just, it improves your marketing spend, quality of leads, which gives you better conversion rates, better revenue, better product, and you just keep going on and on, right? So investing in key analytics, massive, massive point.
No, I absolutely agree, and I think we're seeing that as one of the key use cases for LeadSquared as well across our customers. Right, is customers coming back and saying, "I want to know what is my conversion or what is my analysis of outreach on leads coming from my website versus leads coming from a marketing campaign or from my outreach. How my telesales performing when we are doing a webinar and following up on leads, or we are doing an event-based outreach, right?" Being able to identify those reports and looking at the reports in real time inside your CRM, which is integrated with your dialer, integrated with your different kinds of tools that stitch your marketing and sales together, and then being able to leverage that analysis on quality on from your database, from your leads, from your sales reps. I think that's very, very essential. That we are seeing as one of the common use cases coming up as well.
Likewise, and that's been an area that we at ScottStack also double down heavily on, because the amount of information you sit on by talking to an end customer is unparalleled, and the number of times the kind of surprises you see, it's all there. Yet because no one's going to listen to calls, right? So it's you can extract all of those insights out of those conversations and calls and put it in front of leadership, and suddenly everyone knows what the true picture is. So doubling down on analytics is so important. Cool. I think just winding up. I think we've covered this already, so I don't need to really stress on this. Just circling back, everything we talked about in this entire setup was just focused on. I think we didn't really cover hiring too much. I don't think anything's massively changing in hiring except being much more reward friendly and being able to absorb team in different flexible capacities, be it in-house or working from home. We talked a lot about management with productivity, sales operations, better managers. We talked a lot about training through call QA and even analytics. And I think data security is just table stakes today. As a business, doesn't matter if your team's in-house, outsourced, InfoSec is the most critical area to invest in, because all it takes is one mishap and you lose a bunch on your reputation, or your customers suddenly feel distrusted, right? So investing in good data security is absolutely critical in today's day and age. Other than this, I think if I have to really think maybe 2 or 3 years out, I think one will be that with the way we're seeing technology pace, and there's so much sales tech out there, but we believe that it'll get to a point where smaller businesses will actually be able to put together a very similar stack to someone spending a bunch of money on, say, a massive custom Salesforce setup and several other things, right? So we believe that with the way things are pacing, you will have much more robust solutions for an SME or a small business to also run a meaningful inside sales, telesales, or field sales team for that matter. And the other is the changing role of the support function. Now, a lot of people are talking about this. I haven't seen this in action as much, but almost everyone is looking at automating and cutting costs on support, because support doesn't really generate revenue. But there's a possible future where your support team becomes an upselling and cross-selling machine as a business. And I see several brands, especially in e-commerce or even in education, talk about it, because once you acquire a customer, because it's so expensive to acquire a customer, a lot of us are talking about how do we extract and increase the lifetime value of this customer. And because your support team is an area where your customers are interacting with, you're automating some of it because it's a cost center, but flipping that into a revenue center at some point is a priority for several businesses. And so those are the two big shifts that I believe will come in the next 2-3 years, as we spend much more time, as customers build more affinity towards a brand, and you start to create like a longer touch sales cycle, a longer LTV cycle and that may be true for several products. It may not apply to every industry, but if you have a high LTV and a long-term, relationship with your customer, this becomes super important. So I think those are the other two big. I think that's really that's my time. I think I've covered whatever we believe would be relevant in the next couple of years, and I hope this was helpful, and happy to jump into questions from here.
Thank you. Absolutely, this was super insightful, Rishabh, to say the least. I think it gave everybody a sense of what they can do better, how they can improve on what they're doing today, and reflect on changes that need to be made to become successful, and then what to look for and look forward to in the future from telesales as a function. There are some very interesting questions that have come up by the members of attending. So one of the questions is, Shivam asked, what key metrics apart from talk time and conversion percentage is measured at specifically at an agent level?
Okay, so I think the answer to that question is it depends, but and I'll say why, right? There's actually a book, I'll find out the name and I'll add it here. These guys researched like hundreds of companies, and they asked everyone, I was like, okay, what kind of metrics do you track? And the answer was, they came up with about 330 metrics that you can measure a sales team on. I'm not kidding. And so this book's called Cracking the Sales Management Code. And it's got every metric in the world that you can possibly use to manage your sales team. But if I have to simplify, obviously it depends on the type of selling you're doing, right? It depends if you're doing inside, let's say for a second, let's assume you're doing inside sales. Ultimately, there are 5-6 key metrics that truly drive key value, right? So, and I have a document here where I can actually open this up so I can tell you what that exactly is. So one's obviously dials or calls, right? Like that's standard. The next is conversations. It's very important it's not just about talk time. You could be like, on the phone for several hours. Surprising fact, I had this company once tell me, my agent puts the dialer on and there's no one on the other line, it's just silence. And suddenly I see, hey, this talk time so high. People do that, right? So salespeople will find ways to game the system. Like, remember that there'll always be people like that in your team. So calls to connects to conversations, very, very critical. Call quality audits, very critical. Then from there, it depends on what your sales cycle is, right? So if you have to set up a meeting, so it's appointments set to met. If you don't do meetings, or sometimes you do multiple meetings, like this one insight I got was in real estate was that it takes 2 meetings to get to a good outcome. So they track the second meeting as like, so it's not even the first meeting. Like as a manager, I'm like, I don't care how many first meetings you went to, how many second meetings did you go to is what I care about, right? So those are some of the things that you can look at. Ultimately, break your metrics into 3 parts. Don't confuse your sales team. Activities, objectives, outcomes. Activities is what the inputs are, what is completely in your control. Objectives are the quality of those activities, like conversations, call quality, appointment set, etc. And then outcomes is your revenue, obviously. And then you work backwards. You get people to work on the activities and the quality of the outcomes, quality of the objectives. Activities are things you can measure daily or weekly. Objectives are things you can measure once in 2 weeks, once in 3 weeks, because that number won't change. Outcomes is revenue. You measure that monthly, quarterly, and so on. I hope that answers the question. I'm happy to put my email in here, and if you guys need a summary of the book, I actually have written one with all the metrics. So if you actually want to see what that's like for your team, it's there, but you have to do it yourself. Like there's no other way.
Yep, I think that was very well summarized, and I think everybody would want to sneak peek into those notes of what
Happy
those
to send that.
330 different metrics are. At least I know
Yeah.
I want to spend some time reading that. So I know we're almost on time. We have a minute left, and I want to take that time to thank everybody who's joined us today. I hope you guys found this very insightful. We will try to make sure that every question that has been posted that we've not been able to cover, we'll make sure that Rishabh and I can work on getting those answers back to you guys, and we'll post them. We'll send them across.
Yeah.
Uh, Feel free to reach out to LeadSquared, to ScottStack for any specific information you guys would want to know more about. We'd be happy to help. Finally, it's been a pleasure having you, Rishabh, and talking to you and knowing more about
Thank you.
ScottStack, your experience. And I hope that we can do this more often. Shibani, Rishabh has already told you and given you an insight to do a webinar
I'm
on sales
happy.
ops.
Yes, and I'm happy to go on. I have time. I'm happy to get through more questions if you're good on time. I know Shibani mentioned that it's important that we answer every question as possible.
Okay,
I'm okay.
perfect. All right, so
Yeah.
let's take a couple of more. So Rajiv asked, as per industry standard, how many calls should be assigned to a telesales agent?
Great question, Rajiv. Depends on if you're doing cold calling or warm lead calling. Let's assume you're not cold calling for a second. If you're reaching out to warm leads, typically the number is anywhere between 30 to 50 from what we've seen. But then it's also a function of handle time and things like that. So typically in one day, an agent can be on the phone actually talking to people. Physically, it's not possible to do that more than 4 hours. You lose your mind right after that. So 4 hours means, let's say, 7 hours of dial time, so give or take. So 3.5 also is peak productivity. So now look at 3.5 hours of talk time, 210 minutes. What's my average handle time? Let's say it's 3 minutes, right? Which means I can do theoretically 70 connected calls every day, which means it takes me 2 calls or like 1 call to connect with one lead. So I can do maybe 140, but I also have follow-up. So you can't throw 140 leads at people. They'll just be wasting them. So maybe do like half of that, right? Ultimately, keep A/B testing this. Some agents can do more than others. It's very important that you talk to your agents and understand what their capacity is and don't give them excessive leads if they can't handle it. It absolutely makes zero sense to give everyone the same number of leads. Like, and most good CRMs, I know LeadSquared does that, will let you sort of distribute leads in a slightly better way. Makes zero sense to give everyone the same number of leads because each individual is built differently. And so you need to start to see, you also need to see which agents are wasting leads, right? If you're giving more leads to someone, are they doing a good job of it? And so those are important things. The answer is not as simplistic as I'm going to give everyone 50 leads, and it may work for a little bit, but you'll soon see that starts to break because every agent handles leads differently. And if you give them too many leads, they'll get spoiled. They'll only take the good ones. They'll leave anything else and they'll not work on it. So
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Another question Praveen asked is, what are the key metrics that are to be looked at an auto dialer?
I think dials, connects.
The standard.
What else can you look at? I actually really don't know. What else can you look at? How many dials does it take to connect to a lead? How many attempts do you have to make? 3, 4.
Yeah.
If you want to get more creative, you can do best time to call. Like one of the things we do at ScottStack is, because of the way our workforce is set up, we can call after 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Like that's a slot that you can call on. But because your sales team has left the office, no one's calling. And your customers have also left the office, so they're ready to take calls, but they're not getting any. So we actually see really good connect rates between 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Don't call people after 8:30 p.m. I don't think you can even do that according to TRAI. But yeah, so like you can do things like best time to call, best channel to use, but that's more omni-channel, which is like, WhatsApp, etc. Those are possibly some things that you can do.
Sounds good. And I think let's take one more. How does one decide whether to hire an internal team or outsource to a company like ScottStack?
Great question. Time for me to make a pitch.
Yes.
I think the answer is it depends. And I think, to give you a better answer, I think you should just reach out to us and we'll help you. But at a fundamental level, right? Like, what's your DNA? Is your DNA to build a telesales team? And it's not everyone's DNA to build a telesales team. Like, building a sales team requires a lot of work. And some companies are very product centric and they're very happy building products and leading telesales, which is a company and a business in itself, because building, managing, training a sales team is a lot of work. So there's that. Then there's always, hey, I can make a team of 10 people, but I can't grow beyond 10 people because suddenly now that's very, very intense. So are you in that situation? Hey, I have 50 people, but I'm done. Like, this is it. This is all I need. That's, it could be that. So I think at each level of your growth journey, you'll be confronted with different questions. And obviously, ScottStack is not a end all be all. I mean, we may or may not be able to help, but I think it's important that you sort of set up some semblance of what your sales motion should look like, and test it out, at least in the early days. And more often than not, it'll be difficult to scale that function. Some businesses are able to scale it more than others. It is not easy. And if it's not easy, or even if it is, we can definitely help. So
perfect. So I think on that note, everybody knows, if you're looking for any kind of help with telesales, just feel free to reach out to Rishabh, to myself. We'll be happy to help. Again, thank you so much for joining in. Thank you so much for your time, Rishabh. And
thank you so much, Nick. This was awesome.
Doing it again. Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone.
Everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.